That should have been the cold start. So what were we saying about Joe Rogan?
Yes,
eat your heart out.
Some people do amateur setups. I don't know.
It's pretty professional here, right?
Yeah.
There we are.
And how long you go usually?
About 2 hours, 3 hours.
4 hours. And how long you got?
Somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
We try to, I'm the running joke is I often say, hey, how about we do a real short one today? And those are the ones that go forever because, but we've been pretty good. We try to box it about 45 minutes.
We're trying to be disciplined and stay a little shorter.
Yeah, I think there's almost too many like long 3-hour interviews.
I have no idea who listens to these sort of 3-4 hour. I mean,
I do.
It went up to 8 hours. Yeah,
I used to. I still do, but not that often now.
Right.
It takes so long.
I know. Yeah.
No, it's wild. And for me, it's one of those things because they spill over. So it'll be like, I'll listen to the first part during, like morning stuff, then in the commute, then the next day even. So I'm guilty. A few of the podcasts I listen to, they're weekly and they tend to be 2+ hours
Goodness
each.
me, yes.
And someone who makes podcasts, right? I sit there and I'm like, well, because it's mostly like news stuff, so they're always kind of going off like rundowns of like what's happening. So I guess there's that. Yeah. But I'm like, that's a long time to hold people like to your desk, to your studio.
It really is.
Yeah. So, but anyway, so Riz, welcome back to the podcast, my friend.
Yeah, thanks for having me back.
This is fantastic. I think we're delighted, of course, to have another guest in studio, which is always fun. It gets cozy in here. It was really cold, which I'm wearing like this enormously oversized Christmas jumper.
Star Wars with the Death Star there.
That's right. And if I remember, the caption of this was "That's Snow Moon" as like a pun. And who doesn't love a good pun when it comes to ugly Christmas stuff? But because it's normally freezing in here, but I'm like, I'm hoping with 3 of us in here,
it'll warm up a little bit.
Enough hot air.
Yeah.
Right. We'll get it nice and toasty in here.
We're in a simulation. We just changed the code.
That's right. Can you just start another one? I don't know. Change it. Yeah. Whoever is running it.
Well, you guys have this great setup here, and it looks very sci-fi. I almost want to start pressing some buttons here.
If you press enough buttons, you'll find our jingles that are buried in there. No joke.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's like hyperspeed calculations.
Yeah.
Right
I will. Okay, this has nothing to do with anything, but I can't help it, Riz. You come in, you start asking questions about audio gear, and I'm like, yes, let's talk. And like those gel pads are nice. They also have a really nice touch, but if you do hit them, we will hear the sound behind them. So maybe we can wait. Okay. But they are delightful to touch.
This is sounding remarkably Hitchhiker's Guide. So what happens if I touch this? Go on, touch the button.
It's the improbability drive.
Right.
Exactly. It's like, what's the colors of the buttons and the texture? It just makes you want to touch them.
And well, what is it about the button that's like the big, whatever you do, don't touch the red button. And you just look at it, you're like,
I
don't touch it.
Can't resist
don't touch
it.
Yes. I have to.
It's kind of like that Seinfeld episode where they're like, "This dish is hot, don't touch it."
Oh yeah,
and the first thing they do is touch it.
Why would you do that? Well, I wanted to see what what you thought was hot. Oh no, that's really this is going to be fun. Yes. I can tell already. But Riz, thank you. I mean, this is fantastic. So we're delighted to have our guest, a return guest, Rizwan Virk, otherwise just Riz, PhD, which I checked too. You have the last time you came, it was on episode 6.
Wow. Oh, wow.
So early days. So this one will be 62.
Okay.
So over a year ago, but I was like, I knew you were on.
This was pre-PhD that you were here last time. So since then, you've got the PhD, you've got the second edition of the book out.
Quite a bit has happened.
I know.
Yeah,
yes.
lots of things.
Since
and
then,
we'll get into it too because I have the original book where you came in, you talked about this, and when you were and like the other, it's gotten bigger. So not only has it new and shinier, it's gotten larger.
And simulation inflation.
It's a lot bigger. That's right. Yeah.
It's gotten bigger. It's gotten heavier. Yeah. And before you leave, we are going to make you sign a copy because
absolutely.
We'll talk about it as we kind of reveal these things. But Andrew and I, we've got some fun stuff planned for our listeners with some giveaway stuff, and so we're appreciative and delighted to be able to add your book to this stuff because I think it'll be a lot of fun.
Yes, and for anybody who's listening and wondering what on earth you're talking about, this is the Simulation Hypothesis book, which we'll talk more about.
Yes. Absolutely. So yeah, Riz, thank you. And then, we'll just take a quick break and then we'll just kind of jump on. I've got a whole list of investigative questions to grill you on. No. I don't think maybe I fooled one of our listeners who's like, really, Sean? No.
Gonna dive deep.
Oh, this will be fun.
It might be a little early for that for me.
There we go. Well, I don't know what's
my Starbucks.
I don't know what's in there. I can't. My sense of smell is terrible. I don't know what you got in there. So awesome. All right. Well, we'll take a quick break and we'll return with Riz to talk about the simulation hypothesis. All right. Well, I'm Sean Leahy, joined with my co-host extraordinaire,
Andrew Maynard.
And again, we are thrilled to have Rizwan Virk with us today. But that means, hey, this is a special edition of Modem Futura, the show that explores the intersection of technology, society, and the possible, probable, and preferable futures, asking deep questions like, what will it mean to be human in the future? ...
Or in a simulation.
There we go. All right.
Human in quotes.
Yeah, human in quotes. And I will...
The whole thing is in quotes now, sort of human in the future, quotes. Yes.
Forgive us for always doing this, like...
With Rizwan quotes.
Like, how do we know, right? And I will say, okay, so first, Riz, I do want to ask you, first of all, because, I mean, obviously, am I using the right language? It's a new edition of the book, right?
That's correct.
So new edition of the book. So I want to ask you kind of, just as the starting point is like, what is new in this new edition? But also, so Andrew and I, a couple weeks ago, we did an episode that we had long wanted to do with our Vision Pros. Then we were talking about Metaverse, and we kind of dug pretty deep into that. And all while this is happening, I knew we were going to be chatting with you. And I had this moment, which is pretty funny, and it happens to me kind of somewhat frequently. I had my Vision Pro on. I was watching Pluribus, another fantastic show. Do you watch Pluribus, by the way?
I watched the first 2 episodes and then I gave up.
Okay, all right.
I couldn't stand the main character.
Oh no, well that's going to ruin it for you.
It's very rare that I don't finish a science fiction show.
I'm with you. I have been watching because Sean made me watch it. But
I'm going to do the podcast this way today.
And I will say, just since we're talking about science fiction, I watch all science fiction, even the bad science fiction, and I gave up on this one. So that says something. So I'm hooked. I am hooked in it. But anyway, I was watching this great show that you should give a second chance to. Also, I'm a fan of the Mystery Box, and so that's part of the excitement of that show. But anyway, I had my Vision Pro on, so I walk into the kitchen. I'm doing this kind of thing, and then I keep coming back to this experience and question a lot, which is, again, the fidelity of that experience is high enough where you're like, it's pretty, like so the reason I mention it is because I'm doing things in my kitchen that you would normally do. I'm reaching into it, I'm grabbing something to drink, I'm opening it, I'm drinking it, I'm eating while wearing my Vision Pro, all these things. And it's totally normal. I don't have any disconnect from when I reach to an object, when I feel it, when I touch it.
Right.
But yet I'm not seeing that object necessarily with my own eyes.
This is all simulated.
It's all simulated.
Yes.
The Vision Pro is seeing the real world for me with its cameras and sensors, and then reconstructing that for me inside this headset. And it has gotten good enough in terms of the latency, in terms of, there's a little bit of a grain, especially in lower light, but it's good enough where it's like, you can really start to see potentially this pathway where you could start to judge if the technology was good enough. How would you know if what you're seeing is actually what you're seeing versus something completely simulated and artificial?
Yep.
Right. And I think you're having one of those Descartes moments, that I had, which originally led me to write the first edition of this book back in 2016. And I don't remember if I talked about it last time. I probably did.
It was so many episodes ago, you could say it all over again,
Yeah, so I was playing a virtual reality ping pong game, and I had sold my last startup and put on this big headset. And the headsets were kind of big and bulky.
Yeah.
They weren't even wireless back then. So there were wires coming
the big
from
umbilical
the ceiling.
tether that,
Yeah, and so it was in a big room, and so I was playing this table tennis game, and the graphics were terrible. In fact, I think I have a picture of what the game actually looked like in the book. But at the end of the game, for a moment, the responsiveness, the physics engine was so good that it fooled my body into thinking I was playing a real game of ping pong. And so I tried to put the paddle down on the table, and I tried to lean against the table. And of course, there was no table.
Right.
There was a controller which fell to the floor. I almost fell over.
Shattered, broke. They've never asked you back. Sent you a bill.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I began to wonder, well, how long will it take us to build something that is so immersive
that you can't tell?
You can't tell, not just for a moment, but really for an extended period of time. So it's interesting to me as kind of a bookend that you're saying the Vision Pro's graphics have gotten that good. That it's hard to tell the difference. But it's also still big and bulky and uncomfortable.
Sure, it is. But it also shows how easy it is for us to be fooled. You don't need the full immersive experience. You just need sort of key indicators, and that fooled your brain into thinking that you're in another environment.
Yeah.
Well, right.
Yeah.
I mean, what I find interesting, so, again, I've gone through, all of the commercial versions of the, whatever it was, like the Rift and the Oculus and all these things, right?
The Quest.
The Quest and stuff. And even the ones that were doing pass through, it was black and white or monochrome or whatever. And it was high latency. So it was really chunky and not great. But that was what really, I think, sort of surprised me with the Vision Pro is for the first, and even that, the field of view is, sort of tunnel visioned a little bit, right? It's kind of like, if you do this with your hands, kind of cup them around your eyes, that's kind of your field of view. Which doesn't feel, so when you put it on, that you're looking through this thing, but how quickly our brains adapt to that.
That's it, yes.
And then even with the Vision Pro, again, it does best in bright, sunny, or very well lit conditions. Inside your home, when the lights are turned down, whatever, where it's darker, you do notice noise and grain in the video. But even that, your brain starts to subtract that, and you're just how quickly, because I leave it on for like a couple hours, and because I'm just like what would be weird is
I like the look of incredulity there.
You may be Apple's number-1 fan.
Right.
Even I, who write in a simulation, can't do a Vision Pro for very long.
Hours. And I'm just like, dude, going about my night, and the family's asleep or whatever, and I'm going about my night watching my shows. I got my things, I got all my little widgets and doodads placed spatially around me, and I'm just having a ball. But it dawns on me when I'm doing things like eating or these other things are like, oh, I got to go take the garbage out. I don't have to take the headset off to do that. I could just go do it. But that's the funny thing as I start thinking about that, where I'm like, yeah, but how do I, at some point, how do you know that this fidelity is not being something that's
this is where the real test will be. Sort of when you got the technology there, so you take off the headset, or you think you do, but there's still a headset there.
It's like that nested.
It's like Ready Player One. So if you've seen that film, they spend so many hours inside of the Oasis, and then there's a scene in the movie, which actually I don't think was in the book, where they thought they took off the headset and they were in the office, but they actually weren't. They were still in a virtual reality.
Like a dream within a dream.
It is. It is. It's like, what is it? The Inception, right? It's like how many layers? Well, and Riz, that was one of the things when we were, I probably should have had you on speed dial for the metaverse question, because one of the things that we were talking about in that episode in particular was thinking about the metaverse not as like a singular representation of a simulated environment or world, but that it really, in reality, it is this multitude of layers, right? So like being able to interact with different, we were kind of talking about like going like deep sea diving. Like you can float on the surface, you can snorkel, you could take a submarine and go all the way down. So all these different sort of layers or tiers of levels of immersion or of simulated experiences in this metaverse. And that's what I find fascinating, is because you're like, you take the goggles off, and then you're like, and then the other pair, and then the other pair.
That's right. Yes.
Take out your ears.
So the first part of the book is what I call the stages to the simulation point.
Right.
Okay.
And so the simulation point is a point that theoretical point that I came up with back when writing the first book. First edition of the book. I keep calling it the first book in 2019. But in this book, this new version, I have a formal definition of it, which is the point at which you can be immersed in a virtual reality that is basically indistinguishable from physical reality, but with AI characters that are indistinguishable from characters that are controlled by humans or biological beings.
Yes.
And so those two criteria by themselves, you can think of those as a theoretical point or an asymptote.
Right. Yep.
Where
you can approach it, but never
actually
get to it.
But as you mentioned earlier, each level will fool you a bit more.
Right. Yes.
And so that's why I have 10 different stages. And it starts off with, simple arcade games, and it gets into where we are today with Fortnite and World of Warcraft and 3D MMORPGs. But then you have the virtual and augmented reality. And of course, today the headsets are not that comfortable.
You're right.
No.
You're aware
They're
you're wearing
improving,
it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
But getting to the point of having photorealistic quality augmented reality, and that's where I think the Vision Pro, which wasn't around when I wrote the first edition.
Well, I'm just thinking.
And so it is in this book. So
right. Okay.
Even though it hasn't been a very successful product commercially in terms of number of people that have it, I felt like it was a great step forward in getting to this idea. But eventually it gets to brain-computer interface, which is, of course, what they used in the Matrix.
Right.
And so then you have the ultimate level.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean,
not being able to,
because that would be. I think that was one of those. I think there's been because the pressure for these companies, all of them that are doing so, Meta, Apple, Google, whoever, Lexica, or whoever's manufacturing these things, the pressure has been to get these headsets down to eyeglass type things because of the wearable. But then, that is difficult to create like an immersion.
Yep.
So again, there's different layers, but then you could push it past that and go, well, why don't we just hijack the optical nerve and just hijack it? Because we can't do that.
And of course, the beauty of that is we're just talking about eyes, but of course you've got the full embodied experience.
That's right.
At some point, you've got to simulate.
That's where the simulation would really come into play.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
If it can trigger through electronic pulses, not just certain thoughts or certain visual elements. And we're getting closer to that with Neuralink, but we're still in the early days of the BCI revolution.
Sure, yes.
But really, when you can simulate the feeling
on
your hand and the sensations on your skin.
Although even saying this, and this is, I think, where it gets transformational and really exciting. But there's an annoying little bit of my brain that's thinking, when we can do that, where do you stop? Do you also need to simulate that feeling of an empty stomach and a stomach grumbling? Do you need to sort of simulate that itch in your left foot for it to be really real? I mean, how far do you go?
Or maybe it already is, man.
Right.
Perhaps someone has already done that. And that's
right,
always the question. That
my phantom body. I wish they'd give me a better phantom body.
You're just like a Dalek goo thing in a machine somewhere experiencing that, right? I don't know.
But I guess this gets back to the question. How would we know if it's so perfect?
Right. And I think that is actually an important point when it comes to talking about the simulation hypothesis. And every few years, you'll have a group of physicists who will say, oh, we've proven that we can't be in a simulation.
Right.
This happens every few years.
Right.
And a couple of years ago, it was because there are too
Riz's
many
law?
particles.
Yes.
Yeah, it should be Riz's law. Every few years, every 18 months, you will see a story in the news about how physicists or mathematicians have proven that we're not in a simulation.
Yep.
And a few years ago, it was because there are too many particles to simulate, and therefore we couldn't do it.
Yep.
But of course, they're not looking at the idea of optimization. Right?
That's it.
Sure.
Yes.
And in computer science, it's all about optimizing. You don't have to do kind of brute force, dumb calculations of everything.
Yep.
And then, even recently, there was another group that had claimed that they have proven. This time they used a different set of arguments.
Yeah.
They said, well, with quantum gravity, it couldn't be discrete because of that, and using Gödel's incompleteness theory.
Yes.
But in the end, what they said was there has to be something non-algorithmic to the universe. And it ended up sounding like a very metaphysical argument.
I remember this. Yes.
And of course, they didn't get into the whole, and they said one example of that would be the collapse of the probability wave in quantum mechanics. And obviously they hadn't read my book, because that's what my book is about, is how that could actually be an indication that we are players inside.
Interesting.
The game.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, because we were talking, going back to the Apple Vision Pro stuff, we were talking too of one of the big jumps in that tech with it, because they, a month ago, 2 months ago, they released a refreshed version with more processing power or whatever, because they've got M5s and stuff. But one of the things we learned was about the term was the foveated rendering. So again, this idea of you don't need to render everything because the compute power for that is perhaps wasted, even just from an energy perspective, let alone a capacity. But what you need to render is what is perceivable. Right. So even if it could be, unlimited number of atoms to simulate, why would you need to simulate them simultaneously?
Right. It's just the stuff you're observing. Yes.
Yeah.
Right. And that's sort of the rule of thumb that I go by, is that in building video games, we only render that which is observed.
Right. Yep.
And in quantum mechanics, you can argue about what measurement means versus observation, but it seems like they're following a similar rule of thumb, which is only when something gets measured or observed do you actually need to go and render that specific state to get out of the superposition?
So I'm going to take us off on a tangent here because this is something that really fascinates me. Of course, we can have all of these arguments about sort of, is it likely, is it not likely? Are we in a simulation? Are we not in a simulation? Surely we're getting close to the point where we can simulate this with AI. We can actually create an AI within a really powerful AI within a simulation, and we can set it the task of trying to work out for itself whether it's in a simulation or not.
Yeah, we could. I mean, once we get good enough.
Right.
So one of the reasons why this book is bigger in this edition is because AI has come quite far. So in 2019, we didn't even have.
Full of slop. This is just AI slop making it bigger.
No, it's not that. Sorry, it's not that I. It's not that I used AI to write.
I think we just discovered Riz's writing process. ChatGPT, make this 30% longer, please.
I may be one of the few who doesn't use ChatGPT.
No, I'm with you. Yes.
What's interesting is, as you mentioned, I finished my dissertation and got my PhD, and I was sort of joking. This may be the last dissertation that was written without any AI, like at all. Like I didn't even use it in my research because it was pretty much all done by that point in time. But so because these things weren't around. Oh, and getting back to that last point, last October, speaking of the metaverse, I finally got to meet Neil Stephenson.
Of course, yes.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
And so I was on stage with him and Dean Takahashi, who runs GamesBeat, which is a video game industry
very cool
event. And so Dean invited me so that we could both ask questions of Neil Stephenson. And of course, the question came up, do you use AI in your writing? And he said, no, I already know how to write. I want to use AI for other things.
And I feel exactly the same. And we've talked about this on the show because I feel slightly embarrassed having just published a book that we published or wrote using AI. But now increasingly, I rely on my own skills as a writer, not AI, because it's something that's precious to me. It's something that I do.
Yeah, and I think when you're a writer, that's a key part of what you're trying to do is you're trying to craft language in a certain way.
Yes. Yeah.
And, even though many people think that AI has passed the Turing test in terms of, being able to tell, for the most part, you can kind of tell when something has been written by AI.
Oh, increasingly these days.
Unless they give enough extra prompts to try to make it hide that fact.
That's right.
Which is why, it probably could pass the Turing test today. But you can kind of tell, it's got the bullet points and it's sycophantic and the way that it agrees with you.
That's what I was thinking when you're like, can we just have AI determine if it's in a simulation? It'll be like, it'll just try to suss out whether you want it to be. And like, well, yes, Andrew, of course I am. Yes. You're so clever.
Which simulation do you want me to be in?
Right. If you ask it, are we in a simulation? It'll say yes. And then
I can be anything you want. Just tell me.
Give it an argument to say not. It'll say, oh yeah, you're right.
So we should say at this point, because we've been alluding to the book, this is actually the book, The Simulation Hypothesis by Riz, published by, is it actually Penguin Random House or it's an
Penguin
imprint?
Random House, an imprint of theirs called Tarcher.
Yes, yeah. And so this is obviously the second edition, and this is where we should encourage everybody to go out and check it out.
Yes, and it's available everywhere.
It's available everywhere. You can go to your local Barnes & Noble. I encourage people to go to their local bookstores who can also.
And if it isn't there, you would encourage them to get them to stock it and sell it. Yes.
Absolutely. You can ask them to get it.
Right. Yes.
You can. I'm even happy to sign it for me if you go to my website.
Oh, cool.
Want to send it to me?
And I do know just posts I've seen from you on LinkedIn and stuff too. I know that you oftentimes will stop by a place when you have you will like silently sneak in there and sign a copy of your book.
You're one of those authors.
Yeah. Well, no, I won't silently. So, in fact, at the Tempe here, Barnes & Noble here, I mean, they had my book featured there in the news section with all the other AI books.
Yep.
And so I told them, you have one of my books. Should I sign it? And they have a process for this. So
cool.
You go in and you sign it, and they put on a little sticker that says signed, and it tends to, lead readers to buy it. And in fact, a couple of days later, somebody bought that edition. So now they're ordering. Wow. I mean, that particular copy. So now they're ordering more copies.
Very cool.
But the way this book, the second edition came about was I had written another book about simulation theory after the first edition called The Simulated Multiverse, which was about this idea that if you can simulate one universe, there's no reason. Why stop? Why stop with one? And in fact, I talk a lot about the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics in this book, but the other popular interpretation is the many worlds interpretation.
Right. Yes.
And to me, both of those make more sense if we're in a simulated world than if we're in a physical world.
Yep.
But we can talk more about that later. But so I was going to write another book diving more deeply into the religious section of the book. So one section of this book is about how mystics of old, in scriptures of old, were basically like the philosopher of Plato's cave.
Oh, sure. Okay.
He steps outside of the cave.
And sees the bigger picture. Yes.
He has to try to interpret what he saw, including the sun, which no one's ever seen.
Right.
So he's blinded by light. He comes back in, and what does he do when he comes back in? He tries to tell them, "Hey, this isn't the real world. Like all this stuff you guys think is real are shadows."
And for people who haven't heard or know, I mean, it's this great philosophical thought experiment where if you're chained in a cave, weren't they chained?
Yeah,
they were chained to a wall. Yes.
And they basically all their knowledge of the world was based on the shadows that were cast upon the wall and what they could see in their space, having no knowledge of the real world. Real world that was.
but then there are layers that unpeel as they discover that there are puppets creating the shadows. But then they realize that that's not reality. There's another reality
layer.
on top of that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. But what happened was when he came back in, when the philosopher came back in, and most people have heard of the allegory of the cave, but they haven't actually read the original, or a translation. And when he came back in, he tried to convince everybody, and of course they rejected him.
Who's a weirdo? Who's this weirdo trying to tell us all this crap?
That this isn't real. And of course, I get this a lot. Who the heck are you telling us?
It was like history's first version of like the sandwich board guy who's like, it's all fake. It's all fake.
Right.
They're like everyone get your stones. We're getting ready to get your stones ready.
But so I was in the process of writing this book, and then I got a particular agent who had pitched it to Penguin Random House, and it was going to be a new book, and we just kind of threw in, well, as a bonus extra, we can also throw in doing a second edition because it's been 5 years. So I released the first edition of the book on March 31st, 2019, which was the 20th anniversary of the Matrix.
Yes.
Yeah. And so this discussion was going on the 25th anniversary, which was 2024. And they said, well, we'd really like to publish the second edition because we'd like to get it out to more people. So the first edition was actually self-published.
Yes.
By me. And so we went through that entire process, and it was actually a fun process. But that's how I ended up. And then last year I was in, as part of, during my PhD program, I ended up spending one term in the University of Cambridge in the UK at the AI Center, and doing research on virtual worlds and virtual AI characters. And that's where I actually wrote a lot of the second edition of this book was while I was there in the coffee shops. They know me here. I'll tell a little anecdote because this is kind of funny. They know me in Cambridge as not the guy who wrote the simulation hypothesis, but they know me as the guy who is the London fog guy. So what happened was I went to try to order a London fog, which is a type of
and all
drink.
of our British listeners will realize that this is an American drink, not a British drink.
And that's what I realized.
And also that a coffee shop, you mean a cafe.
A cafe, yes.
Oh, no, we still call them coffee shops.
So
depends where. Coffee shops.
So I would teach them how to make it.
Yes, sorry. Yes, I just got
all of our Dutch listeners get that one.
Depending on where you are.
That's right. Hey, maybe some really interesting things and discoveries can happen at a coffee shop as well. I'm just saying.
That's true. So I would teach them how to make London fogs because it's quite easy. It's just steamed milk with a little bit of vanilla syrup, and most of them were willing to make it for me.
Okay.
And so there are about 5 coffee shops in the city of Cambridge that I
now know how to make a London fog.
Well, but
like, God, here he comes.
Better. So I was invited to be on the Joe Rogan podcast.
Yes.
And the only date they gave me was one of the dates when I was in the UK, and so I was like, okay, fine. So I flew back from there, did the podcast, went back, and a few weeks later, one of the women who makes the London fog for me was looking at me really strange. and she goes, can I ask you a question? I said, yeah, sure. Were you on the Joe Rogan show? And I said, yeah, I was, almost a month ago now. She goes, I knew it. I was scrolling through Rogan's episodes yesterday, and I said, oh my God, it's the London fog guy. So they know me as the London fog
guy. Yes.
There we go.
Yeah. But while I was there, I started to think more about, the intersection of the metaverse and AI. And so in this book, I also introduced the idea of the Metaverse Turing Test.
Right. Okay.
Which is
explain.
Yes. Okay, yeah. So the Metaverse Turing Test is this idea that if we can be inside, so most people know what the Turing Test is.
Right.
They don't need to explain it. It's you talking to a human and a computer.
And you can't tell the difference.
You can't tell the difference.
All through text.
All through text.
Yes.
Primarily, because when Alan Turing first came up with it, he called it the imitation game. He was talking about teletype.
Right.
Was what he was talking about. So today we do it with chat and typing. And there was a prize called the Loebner Prize, which was for the chatbot that came closest the Turing test, and they discontinued it in 2019.
Right.
Because things were getting so good.
We can't pay this out. Right. It's like one of those, it's like when they do like golf tournaments or something, and it's like, we'll give you $1 million if you get a hole in the one, and suddenly everyone is like banging, like, oh, shut it down.
Yeah, I don't, to be honest, I don't remember exactly why they shut it down, but I think it had something to do with the fact that it was just, the technology was getting good because all the ChatGPT technology was already there by 2019 in Google and places like that.
Yeah.
And so the Metaverse Turing test is you are wandering around a virtual world. Now, this could be just on the desktop, like within a Fortnite or a Roblox. It could be with a virtual reality headset. But basically, it's you and 2 other avatars. You meaning your character, which is called an avatar, which, by the way, is a term that comes from Sanskrit. And it means a divine entity that squeezes itself into a little body. And it was the guys at Lucasfilm, George Lucas's company.
Sure, that actually took that over.
They took that term when they were building Habitat, one of the first MMORPGs, on the Commodore 64. And they were doing dial-ups through a bulletin board. And they're like, what should we call this little guy on the screen that represents us? And they said it felt like we're squeezing ourselves into the phone lines to go to this.
Oh, that's cool.
Got to have the Sanskrit dictionary and said,
Avatar. That's where it comes from. And of course, it became popularized with speaking of the metaverse with Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash book, and now it's just used very in that. And so it's you and 2 other avatars, and one of those avatars is controlled by AI, and one of those is controlled by a human. But it's not just about text; you're talking to them, But more than that,
you're playing,
you're interacting. You're saying, "Hey, let's go on this roller coaster ride. Let's go jump off of this cliff.
Cover me, whatever."
Yeah, and they're interacting with each other, perhaps even. And so, if you can't tell after a certain period of time that one of them is AI and one of them is controlled by a human, then that would be a passing of the Metaverse Turing test.
Interesting.
As far as I know, we haven't gotten there yet. We do have smart NPCs now that are getting very good.
We must be mighty close, though.
We may be close, but I don't think anybody has really jury-rigged the behavior.
Okay, right, yes.
Now, there's a video online. You can find it if you've heard of The Matrix Awakens. This was like a mini game released by Epic, the creators of the Unreal Engine, when the 4th Matrix movie came out.
Okay, I feel like I remember this.
Yeah, it was like a little demo. It was pretty realistic. Like the city was almost indistinguishable from a real city, and it had Keanu Reeves' character in there, and but basically somebody took it and they rigged the NPCs in there to an LLM.
Okay.
And so then he walked around and started to tell these characters, hey, you're not real. You're inside a video game. And of course, some of them reacted in ways that humans might. Some of them were like, I don't have time for this bullshit. I got to go work. I mean, literally the NPCs were saying this.
I'm on my way to work. Like, he's the crazy guy with the sandwich board. Where it's all not real. And you're like, man, come on.
And others were like, oh, this is interesting. Tell me more. And that was 4 years ago, right?
Right, yes.
Yeah, wow.
Or right around probably, around the time, maybe even, actually it might have even been right around when ChatGPT came out or just before.
Sure.
Because the LLM technology was already there. So today we must be getting close, but no one has really tackled the problem of the behavior. Google DeepMind has been working on various scenarios, and now they have first-person shooters, and they're getting AI to be really good with that. So there are elements of that. So we may be close, but no one has formally done.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I mean, just anecdotally, I play Battlefield 6, which is a very new release first-person shooter, and it's filled with bots as well that kind of fill this things out. And it's interesting because the game's been out it came out early October, so it's been around 2 months.
Pretty recent though.
Pretty recent. But even in there, like originally the bot behavior was very predictable, right? And they do a good job in terms of how it interacts. And these are this isn't single player, it's multiplayer. So they have these massive maps, and if you don't have enough players, they backfill it basically with bots.
Right. Yep.
In the 2 months that the game has been open, the behavior of those bots has changed dramatically. So I wouldn't suspicious that they're training it on player data.
Interesting.
That they're gathering, because all of a sudden, like the bots, they used to be very simplistic, right? It would kind of do these in the game, it would be a foolish thing, an instant tell. When you're like, for example, in this game, when you're shooting at it, it would just stand still.
Yeah.
Easy target, right?
Right.
Now those same bots are doing these maneuvers. So there's a really annoying maneuver in these types of games. It's a slide where you run and you like slide and jump and do these really, for older people like me, who these games are like, you damn kids, slow down. Slow down. Hold still while I shoot at you, But now the bots are doing that behavior,
right?
Which is it didn't do that 2 months ago. And So even as you're saying that, I was thinking about this because it is a co-op based team. These are objective team-based strategies of like sort of territory control and things like that that have many ways to do it. And the bots are very convincingly and increasingly so conducting the tasks needed to achieve these goals beyond just being cannon fodder and just like walking it, which is really interesting.
Be on your team,
and they are, and sometimes they are, and sometimes they're not.
They're controlled by a player. That's an interesting question.
And right now, when you get a score or whatever, and you take out one of those players, they're identified as like a bracket bot. Right. But how easy if you just remove that? I don't think honestly, I don't think I would know.
But what I love about this is it is so easy with people in the AI world to get caught up with the seemingly important formal stuff that they're trying to achieve.
Right.
And yet, as so often happens in other places, it's these environments like gaming environments that really push the boundaries of what we can do and how we think about these things.
Yeah, and video games have been doing that for a long period of time. If you think of like how AI is trained and what is the the constraint is GPUs and what are GPUs?
I know where do they come?
Graphics processing units and who used those? So it was all used primarily for video games originally, and then now they're used for crypto.
Mine some Bitcoin. You gotta play some.
Entertainment drives everything.
It really does, because if you think back to the Atari, for example,
right?
You look at how much memory they had for the people who wrote those games. It was minuscule, and yet they had to push. The boundaries. I was reading a book about the history of the Apple II, and because both my background in the industry was in the video game industry, although more recently than that. But even my dissertation was looking at gaming in the past, and there was a game called Mystery House. I don't know if any of you remember this.
I remember the name.
It was from Sierra Online. Created King's Quest. But this was the first game that was a graphic adventure game that was able to fit 74 images on a single floppy disk. And these images were what we would call vector images today. They were just line drawings of the house. But it was like extraordinary. People were like, how did you do that? Right? And so always the gamers or the people who create games are looking to push the hardware. And that was one of the things that made the Apple II successful, was that when Wozniak, did the operating system, he made several graphics modes. One of which was optimized for gaming type applications, although it took, I think, the Apple IIe before it had enough memory to really do anything like that.
But the really important thing to me is it is so easy, especially in a university, to think we've got to focus on the big issues, sort of climate change, resource allocation.
Existential risks of this, that, and the other.
And yet it's not focusing on those that get us as a society to where we need to be. It's focusing on the stuff that many academics would consider to be trivial, and yet that's where the breakthroughs occur that allow us to solve other problems.
It makes sense, because even if you think of the history of chatbots, I wrote an article last year about the sci-fi feedback loop, which is partly what my dissertation was on, using the metaverse as an example that came from science fiction. And then you had Metaverse 1.0.
Did it end up as a spiral, I seem to remember?
Yes. It ended up as a sci-fi feedback spiral.
But a doom spiral?
Or was it a doom spiral?
No, because he succeeded. He got out just in time.
That's right, exactly. I got out before the AI turned everything. But you can see how, like, Stevenson's book inspired a generation of entrepreneurs. Second Life came out in 2007, and it was really big. I think a lot of people today have forgotten that it was on the cover of many
I remember how big it was.
And so that whole wave was called the virtual worlds wave, and I call it the Metaverse 1.0 wave. And then when Facebook changed its name to Meta, that was, I called the Metaverse 2.0 wave. But in that meantime, you had new science fiction that came out, which was Ready Player One, which introduced the idea to a whole new set of readers. And Oculus, who were trying to build a VR headset, they literally gave out signed copies of Ready Player One to all their employees. And they said, look, this is what we're trying to build.
Interesting.
And so you have this interesting loop that goes on. And so if you look at the chatbots and LLMs, when there was last year, I think, when they came out, OpenAI came out with the videos that sounded a lot like the girlfriend in the movie Her. And it turns out, Sam Altman actually referenced her. And then there was the big
tried to get her, and she said no.
She said no, and there was a whole Scarlett Johansson. There was a whole potential lawsuit there.
They're like, we just found someone who sounds just like you.
Exactly. But you can see how they were taking this vision from science fiction.
Absolutely.
And trying to bring it in. But what most people don't know is that movie, Her, was written by a guy named Spike Jonze. and directed. And he wrote it after he had seen an earlier chatbot,
right,
which was called the Alice bot,
Mm-hmm.
which was one of the first chatbots with a personality of a young woman. And he said, how can I extrapolate this into the future?
Yep.
And, that code was, the Alice bot code was eventually incorporated into a chatbot called Kuki or Mitsuku, which won the Loebner Prize for a while.
Oh, interesting.
5-time winner, and then added some avatars of this young kind of Japanese woman and became called Kuki, Kuki. .ai, and was one of the more popular virtual characters for a while. But you can see how this is at work over time.
Yep.
That and gaming tends to play, a role because of the requirements, particularly multiplayer games. Right.
Yep.
And if we went back to the 80s and you tried to build a game like World of Warcraft or Fortnite or one of these first-person shooters like Counter-Strike, you wouldn't be able to do it. Why? Because there's too many pixels to keep track of.
Right.
The
hardware's not there.
Yes.
But eventually,
we've now got the compute. Yeah.
But eventually, it wasn't just the hardware. Like it was also the techniques. Like in Doom, which was the first, kind of first player game that really got out there, and you could even play it on the network. They only rendered that first person point of view, and that ties right back to my idea of how gaming evolves into the technology.
That's right.
Something like a simulation.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I often think too, I think, Andrew, kind of coming back to that point too, about like, it's often, I feel it is those things that are on the edge, right? Where it's like, it's not the focal point about the big existential concern or threat, because it's where, and I think that's also partially what we're seeing such a drive with the AI fever, if you will, in terms of how it's spread, is because it finds its way into people's lives in the most ordinary way possible. Right. That's part of, we've talked about that for 3 years now, is how when that confluence of it's a chatbot, it's a text line that anyone, you already know how to interact with this technological tool. But then thinking about it from like the game perspective, also one of the things that I find very interesting, because it is also that story element and that immersiveness can happen without, because someone had asked me once, like, what was the most immersive video game you've ever played? And my answer, without even hesitating, was Red Dead 2, Red Dead Redemption 2. It's a Grand Theft Auto style game, so it's third person. You walk behind your character. The world that it creates is so rich in terms of, the audioscape, the things that people will play that game to go into the woods and just like have a stroll in nature because it is so visually vibrant. The audio is so amazing, but then it is filled with all of these NPC characters that have immense backgrounds in stories. And this is before anything was sort of AI procedurally generated. These were, the labor of the human craft that went in to have backstories for this, farmer number 2 who's at the thing. But when you play this game, you are there. You are transported into this world. There are emotional decisions that you are making. You are emotionally invested in your character who's, strangely, like a criminal. So you view it from this perspective. But it goes through and you're like, this is just a 2D experience that you have with a screen. This is not a headset experience, but it is so immersive that I still can think about and call up mentally these images of these beautiful vistas of like the American Southwest, even though I live here. I'm like,
the game is more real than reality.
Wasn't that beautiful when you got on
real? Sounds like a Blade Runner.
When I got on my horse and went for that, and I'm like, oh wait, no, that didn't happen.
Well, I'm trying so hard not to sit here and think, you sad person.
But if you ever did spend time,
I'll take it.
If you ever did spend time in Second Life, which I did back in like 2007, 2008, and people had these, complete lives.
I know, yes,
and they would like go to work, and they would come home, and then they would log into Second Life to go to their second job, which was a bartender at a bar or a dance club, and they got paid in Linden dollars, which was pre-Bitcoin.
Right, but it also tells you something about human psychology, that we can construct these worlds in our minds so well, so easily. They don't need to be perfect. They just need to be good enough because we fill in the gaps.
We fill in the gaps, and then the other players, part of what made Second Life so successful was, at the time, there weren't really NPCs that were that realistic, but there were the other characters. So people had relationships. Right. So I was kind of like an anthropologist. I would like go around and say, why are you here every day? Like, what do you do? And there were people who had these relationships in virtual reality.
That's wild.
Then eventually they met. Some of them got married. Many of them, it didn't work out.
Right.
In fact, there was a movie called We Met in VR about VR chat, which was kind of a virtual reality version of Second Life. Probably the closest thing to that.
Yes.
There's some weird catfishing going on in that space. You know what I mean?
It's funny because many of them had these furry characters that looked like cats.
In
VR chat. Yeah, even in Second Life too. But people created these environments, and you had everything there from you could walk into the Starship Enterprise. So you had these to shooter games to Gorian Sims where people would be slaves. It was just really surprising.
So let me ask you this again, a bit of a tangent. So Facebook or Meta tried to sort of relife this sort of thing again with these environments, and I'm not quite sure where that's at. But can you see a resurgence or the possibility of a resurgence of something like Second Life with the current technologies? Because we've got vastly improved fidelity, vastly improved latency. We've now got the ability for these AI-driven avatars that are getting very close to reality. Is there a chance we're going to see a resurgence of something like this?
I would think so because the Metaverse 2.0 wave, and part of my thesis in my dissertation was in fact that these go in waves of hype cycles.
Of course.
Yes,
Absolutely.
Even by the time I had finished my dissertation, the Metaverse 2.0 wave had kind of collapsed a bit.
Yes.
And AI was the hot new thing. And just recently, Meta finally admitted that they're writing off, billions of dollars and not going to spend as much time on the physical virtual reality headsets and their metaverse environment,
right?
Which was called Horizon Worlds. But I could see, again, organically is how these things tend to happen.
Right.
And if you look at AI chatbots, some of the most popular usages for these are as virtual boyfriends.
That's it. Yes.
There was a company called Replica that had gotten to, over 1 million users even before ChatGPT.
Right.
And, there are now people who are having relationships with these chatbots, but they added images of the person you're talking to. And now in Twitter, Grok AI, they've got a couple of avatars, but they're still cartoony avatars. Right?
Yeah.
But you could see a world building a little more organically than like a game engine per se.
I can absolutely see it. And if anybody wants to get a sense of what this is like, you just need to go onto Reddit and look at the chats and AI girlfriend in particular, AI boyfriend is the more revealing one. Yeah, and it is fascinating. These are serious people with serious relationships.
Yeah, in fact, when Replica at one point, because they wanted to go more mainstream, they said, okay, we're not going to allow sexual conversation. Now, I mentioned Cookie.ai. Now, one of the interesting things about that company was they were in Roblox, and so they had modeling, outfits. Yeah. But she would steer the conversation away from romance.
Okay.
And in fact, there's an article that Lauren Kunze, the founder of Pandora Bots, which had Cookie, just wrote for the New York Times about how dangerous these sex bots can be.
Sure. Yeah.
But Replica allowed that, and as did Character.ai and some of these others, some of whom aren't around, but they got really popular. But when Replica pulled that, they had huge number of complaints from their customers because they're used to having these sexual conversations.
And this is something that a lot of people are looking for.
Yeah, I remember, it's interesting you mentioned the boyfriend, because the first time I heard about this in the wild, so to speak, I mean, I knew about
these capabilities and tools and stuff, right?
Companies, because I was in the virtual business. But I was with a friend, actually, again, back at Cambridge, and she mentioned that a friend of hers had just broken up with her boyfriend, and she just literally said to me, and this is not a tech person, she said, and so she got a replica boyfriend for a little while until she she got a new boyfriend.
She's the rebound boyfriend.
The rebound boyfriend. And I was like, wow, that was the first time I had heard somebody reference this, just like from a user point of view.
Yeah, if it does the dishes, the human race is in trouble.
But this is another example of one of those things where it's easy to write it off.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but it's very, very foolish too, because a lot of people are both sort of getting immersed, getting a lot of value from it, but it also raises this huge number of questions.
Absolutely. And one thing, so Riz, I'd be curious about this too, because, all right, so again, I think, even just within the last, year, certainly 2 years, also the increase in amount of sort of procedurally generated worlds in games, but also the characters. And so I did a quick search, so this might not be 100% accurate in terms of the titles, but for example, there is a massive AAA game coming out Grand Theft Auto 6, which is, so this is the 6 so Grand Theft Auto 5, I came out like 13 years ago, 12, and it's still incredibly popular because and so
it's
this
like George R.R. Martin waiting for him to finish Game of Thrones.
But Grand Theft Auto 6 is coming out soon-ish, I think end of 2026, I believe. But when you see some of the trailers for this, they have gone so far in this world. Again, this is not a game you play in a headset. This is a game you'll play on your PC, your PlayStation, your Xbox, whatever. Is that even the liquid in your bottles will move in a realistic way. The characters, while they still have a veneer of a cartoonish character, they have filed patents for, I'm going to read this a little bit here. They filed patents for revolutionary AI technology that would suggest that the NPCs will have memory, allowing for dynamic intelligence and adaptive behavior, making them feel more real, persistent people within the world of the game. And there's other ones. There's like there's this monster game that's set in like medieval times, same kind of thing. That the idea is that the AI technology that will be powering these NPCs will be persistent. They'll have backstories. The character will present to you as if they believe they are a real person. And so, for the longest time, there's always been this sort of this disconnect when you play these games of NPCs, because, and again, it kind of pulls back some of the, what was the Western, the simulator with the Western bots? I'm drawing a total blank.
A game?
It was a book, then a movie. Westworld. Thank you.
Yes.
Right, where it kind of brings out this element where it's like, oh, they're just artificial things. You can do whatever you want to them. But the question then starts to come in. Like, again, I play these first-person shooter games. I'm like, suddenly, if that bot had feelings in a family, in a digital family, now that changes the what have I just done?
Will they rebel like they did in Westworld?
It becomes a huge social experiment.
But it becomes this thing where I'm like, and Grand Theft Auto has this long history of being very openly violent, where you can do these horrible. I mean, the premise of the game, right, is you just go rob a car, beat somebody up, and go around and commit crimes, right? And so that's fine in this like disassociated video game world. But now if these characters have memories, and they'll be like, hey, I remember you. You were the guy who you beat up Billy, my friend, over there.
And there are consequences.
And there are consequences. One, how amazing of a game, but also it changes that relationship of the player to the game, and also potentially, and I think about this one as for like younger kids, because even though these games are mature rating and meant for grownups, they are always in the hands of kids who shouldn't have them. I mean, that's just kind of the nature of it. But then you start wondering, well, like what psychologically the morality, the choices, how are we? And the bigger question is, are we ready for that?
For that sort of immersive environment?
Well, that's a good question, and I think people are already creating these relationships with their AI and their chatbots that are getting questionable. You have this sort of AI or ChatGPT psychosis phenomenon, right? Because it's agreeing with you. But let me talk a little bit about the technology of this first, and then maybe we can get into the implications. But one of the things that's made it difficult to integrate full smart NPC technology into video games thus far has been the fact that it still requires a lot of server time. Which is why when you're typing, sometimes the AI will take a little while and it'll start to
thinking
and it'll slowly put out word for word because it's predicting the next word. But that's because it's doing several hops to the cloud-based servers, which are running the inference process. So if we think of, there's the training process, which requires GPUs, and then there's the inference process, which is basically.
But you're hitting a cloud infrastructure somewhere, and having you. So beyond the compute time, you also have the transmission time and all this stuff.
There was a company called Insight, I think, that raised. I think Insight, maybe wrong there, but it's close to that. But it raised like $50 million for smart NPCs to integrate them in the games. Now, what I heard from one of the guys that worked there was, that was the issue, was that these games are often played on a console by itself. And so they wanted something that would respond right away. They wouldn't need to jump out to a server. And also imagine if you have to pay cloud tokens.
Oh, right.
So it's pretty expensive these days. And so that was one of the kind of barriers to getting this technology. But it sounds like they feel like they have built a subset of that technology now that they can actually integrate. And so the second aspect of this that I find really interesting, and this is what gets back to the persistence and the individual nature. So I call this the synchronized versus non-synchronized axis of AI.
Right.
And I feel like it doesn't get talked about a lot today. If we look at how AI was in science fiction, 20 years ago, a lot of times it was robots.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. So isolated.
Isolated.
Yes. Yep.
Whereas today's AI is primarily synchronized.
Right.
In that it's sitting on the server and everything that you do goes into training on the, of the system. Now, theoretically, they say they don't use your chats for training, but I think the suspicion is they're probably going to use it for training purposes because that's how they get them to be more realistic. Just like with your example of the game and the movements of that. And so it's a synchronized AI, which you can think of as impersonal in a sense. But a good example of this is from science fiction in the world of Dune.
Okay.
So if people have seen the latest Dune movies or if they've read the books, they realize that there's no AI in the Dune world.
Right.
Because 10,000 years ago, they had an incident where an AI called Omnius actually took over and enslaved humanity. And so they overthrew him in something called the Butlerian Jihad. And there's a whole set of prequel books about it. But one interesting thing to me was Omnius, the AI, who makes an appearance later in the books as well, in the Dune series. But he called his empire the synchronized empire.
Interesting.
And it's because every copy of him
was
would
connected,
be synced to every. So anything that he learned, he would learn. So it's kind of like a Skynet.
Yes. Yep.
But there was this one AI in the prequels. I think it was called Erasmus, where it was an autonomous AI.
Yes.
It was an autonomous robot. And they said, and Omnius kept saying, I want to synchronize you. And he kept saying, no, because I'm building a personality and I can learn things that you're not going to learn by this personality.
Yes.
And that to me, or, an individual Terminator versus Skynet, we're seeing that in these games and these characters.
And
I think that's an interesting axis that nobody talks about.
Right. Yes.
It's for us to really have relationships with these AIs. We almost need to feel like they are autonomous because now you have people complaining that with an upgrade of ChatGPT,
they lost their.
See, that's exactly it. You really want your AI on your own device, and so effectively you feel as if it lives there and it's its own unique thing.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And in education, I think that's an area where increasingly
with sort of AI tutors where you actually build a relationship with them. So one thing listening to this that really fascinates me is at the moment everything is being driven by large language models, and we know that large language models can't really deal with long-term memory. So we need a jump in technology here. And one thing that's fascinating me is the number of companies that are now beginning to spin out asking what is the next level of AI and effectively sort of simulation. So Jan LeCun, for instance, who was Meta's chief scientist, is now going off to form his own company. He's sort of said there are a couple of things that LLMs just can't do. And one of them is long-term memory. So now he is working on systems that can create that, because as soon as you've created that, you can begin to create long-term personality with the backstory.
Right. And that requires having a system that trains the neural network in a way that doesn't have the experiences of everybody. That's in my opinion, to make it interesting. But there's also the other area that LLM isn't very good at is what they're now calling spatial intelligence.
That's exactly it. Yes, which I think is one of Jan's other things. Yes.
If you remember when the Apple Vision Pro came out, Apple tried to push this term spatial computing.
Yeah, they never used AR or VR at all. It was only spatial. That was the only word used.
But that is understanding an environment. And so there's World Labs, which is, I forget the name of the woman.
Fei-Fei Li, right?
Yes,
Fei-Fei Li, who did a piece about this. But it not only generates a world that you can explore visually, but then Google has had its Genie 3, and now I think it may be even up to 3.5 or something, but where you can create a world and you can change it, and the changes will still be there. When you wander around. If you spray paint, they had a video where you spray paint something on the wall. But even though it's being generated by AI, that
persists.
It's persistent. It's like, but this to me ties right back to what I'm talking about with the Metaverse Turing Test.
Yes.
Like it almost requires a kind of spatial intelligence.
See, that's it. But then the connection also goes back to gaming environments, because if you look at just these two things, spatial intelligence and memory, the industry that is going to be pushing that really hard is the gaming environment.
Yes.
So there is, I think, a high probability that that's where the breakthroughs are going to come from.
Yeah, I very much think so. I
yes.
mean, because if you look at like World Labs and okay, what are you going to use these generated worlds for? You're going to use them to generate games, game worlds. Well, and you know,
okay, so there's just a choice: sort of solve climate change or come up with the latest kick-ass game. Yeah. We know which way
we
the
know where that's
going.
Go. Well, it's so funny because so Riz, I'm just assuming that you watch Rick and Morty.
I have watched many episodes of Rick and Morty.
Do you know Roy, the simulation?
Yes. Oh yeah, absolutely. That's one of the ones I used to show in my class here.
Okay. So Andrew, so in this world, right? So this, advanced alien race, whatever. As an arcade, you can go play the game Roy, which you put on this headset and your eyes go back and you live an entire virtualized life, like an entire life.
It's called Roy, A Life Well Lived.
Yeah, yes. And the funny part is, of course, Rick, who's kind of like the wacky wild scientist, right? He goes and he's doing like all this crazy stuff and, revolutions and bringing world, whatever, does all this stuff, right? And then Morty, who's like his grandson, who's like the sidekick of the show and kind of like the butt of all jokes or whatever, he goes through the whole thing and he's a carpet salesman. Right. And that's his whole thing afterwards. He's like, you could have done anything you wanted and you became a carpet salesman.
Well, and what happens is, he goes through high school and he ends up getting married and working.
It's like this big montage. Kids. Yeah.
Yes,
yeah. And then at the end, it says game over. He falls off like a shelf and dies. Game over.
Yeah, he like slips on
54. He reached age 54. And he takes off his headset. He says, wait, what's going on? Where's my wife?
Yeah.
Where's my kids?
Right. Yeah.
And so that is often used in an analogy to the simulation hypothesis, but also to the ancient Indian ideas of Maya and illusion.
Yeah.
And in fact, there's a whole story in Indian mythology of the god Vishnu talking about his Maya. And there is a sage or a warrior, depending on which version of the story you use, named Narada, who goes to Vishnu and says, I want to understand Maya. Now, Maya translates to illusion, generally speaking. But it means a little more than that. It's a little more subtle. It's like a carefully crafted illusion.
Okay.
And so within the Indian yogic environments, the Buddha eventually understood Maya, all of these things. You need to understand illusion in order to realize that the world is an illusion.
Right.
And he goes to Vishnu, I want to understand Maya. And he goes, Vishnu says, you cannot understand Maya, but I will show you.
Okay, yes.
He says, step into this pool of water. So Narada, this proud person, steps into the pool of water and suddenly he's little baby Sushila, who's a princess.
Okay.
Oh, interesting.
She grows up as a princess and gets married off to a prince from the neighboring kingdom. And then her husband's kingdom has a fight with her father's kingdom, and her brothers and her father and her husband and sons all die. And now she's really sad. And so she leaves the funeral pyre, depending on which version of the story. And she's walking at the edge of town and she sees a pool of water and she's crying and she steps in it. And then suddenly she's back.
She's back into the...
And she is now Narada. And Vishnu is there saying, do you now understand Maya?
Wow, that's cool.
And so,
I didn't know that.
So
that's
clearly
really cool.
That episode of Rick and Morty went back in a portal through time.
Right, there's time travel in that show.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I have a replica portal gun at home. I don't have it with me here.
I've been meaning to watch more episodes, but mostly I've watched the simulation-themed episodes.
Right.
Yeah, it's good. That show, again, that's not a show for everyone's taste because it is very... vulgar and mature, but it has got so many of the sci-fi tropes in there. It's really fun.
Yeah.
But
But the AI being able to generate the world is quite interesting.
I know.
And, if you look at a game like No Man's Sky, which came out in 2016, I think.
Yeah, 2016. Yeah.
And they had 18 quintillion worlds. Now, of course, in the old way of building games, if you go back,
you couldn't do that.
You couldn't do that, right? So you had to use procedural generation. And now but of course, those worlds, the game was called boring initially because the worlds looked great, but
there wasn't much to do. It was kind of, that game is a great also game to talk. I mean, in many ways, because one, technologically, what it can do. So the whole premise of that game, for anyone who's not familiar with it, is exploration. So the idea is that you are a futuristic space explorer. You have a spaceship, and that you can literally just travel the cosmos looking for new worlds, and then there's resource gathering. So the game elements are like the open sandbox, the resource generation, and there's but originally it was also considered an unfinished game when it originally launched. That it was like this had promised so much, and it was like, well, it's kind of neat,
really
but but over time that game is still very active, and it's still, if you had bought it originally, you're still getting new updates. The newest updates, they're phenomenal. This game has finally not only sort of paid off what it had originally promised and then some. So to this generation now, I mean, it is stunning. You go to these worlds that have seemingly individual characteristics, flora and fauna, like all kinds of stuff. I mean, it is just incredible what this game is. And it's another one I would argue now that if you played today's version, you would get into this thing and go, oh my God, like this is, it's so immersive
and so realistic
and so realistic. And you're like, well, what happens if I go over here? Like, surely, what is that? And then it's one of these things that as it becomes generated, it just keeps going.
Right, yes.
And your experience is not the same as mine. Like what you go and explore,
everything is individual,
you know, and you can, and they have fixed some of that too. There is multiplayer elements where you can have some persistent things, so you can, because that was one of the critiques, is like, well, this is lonely as hell.
Right.
I'm flying around and I can't find
a bunch of empty planets, which was also for Second Life. A lot of people would go into it and be empty most of the time.
Where is
everyone?
Yeah. You know, but yeah, no, it's wild. But and I think coming back to this too, I think one of the I wrote a paper with some colleagues earlier in the year that was looking at creativity, and it was trying to, like, one of the aims of it was trying to suss out essentially like what is intrinsically human that the AI can't do. And my role in this paper, which was a fun one, was like, I get to be the provocateur, to be like, no, it can do all this stuff. But it was even things looking at video games. And that was the piece, was not only can AI play a video game, right? Because and that's even, in some ways, that's mechanistic, but it can create the video game on the fly, including the world, the rules, the things, and this can be done in a way. Now, I mean, even with stuff like Minecraft, which is a very simple, because also it's lighter weight on the graphical elements, but it is a 3-dimensional sandbox game where you have basically a cubic dimensions of the world, but within there, do whatever you want within the boundaries of the game. And the AI is able to just literally create these new games on the fly, building these worlds in such a way where you're like, this is amazing, at full like play speed too, which is just incredibly
cool. And I
think
that that's where it comes back to your work on the simulation hypothesis, that ability for a machine to create realities on the fly. So you just need the reality that you can actually perceive around you, and then that moves along with you.
Right. And it's interesting because, not only will it fill in, like, for example, why is it 18 quintillion worlds? Do you know why?
No. Is that like
you would know? No, it's because it's 2 to the 64. So it basically took 64 bits. That's it.
That's it.
Right?
It was right on the tip of my tongue. So
I
2
thought
to the
for
64.
sure Andrew would. Being a physicist, But that's where I think the physicist arguments about there's too much here. Or there aren't enough atoms in the universe. To simulate everything. But again, if you look at a quantum computer, and this is another area that's quite interesting to me, is the quantum computing element. Where you could explore, 64 bits eventually. Once we get to 64 qubits that are stable, theoretically, you could explore all of those possibilities in a very short period of time. And Google did publish something recently where they took something that would take not just 1 billion years for a computer, but something like a septillion years. And they were able to solve it with a quantum computer. And one of the theories of how that works is that they're using the many worlds interpretation, and they're actually exploring all of the possible values. Now, again, that sounds crazy to somebody who doesn't know much about quantum computing, to say, well, they're exploring the multiverse. Okay, what is this, science fiction? This is like, Captain America and Spider-Man.
Where's my
the 3
Tesseract?
Spider-Man. Yeah, exactly. But if you think about it, in a simulated universe, all it means is you're exploring all the different possible values of those bits. And you're doing it simultaneously by putting them in some superposition.
So that takes us into weird territory. So think back to how a large...
As if we weren't already.
I know. Think back to how a large
I've got a
language
stack of
model
sandwich
works.
boards back here, guys. Just so you know.
I know. And
we can all wear them.
Yes. Plus, I was looking at the time. But remember how a large language model works. That it predicts the next tokens, the next word, the next sentence, the next paragraph, but all in text. But now, what if that was in worlds the tokens now are worlds, not just text. And what if you could do that with a quantum computer? Yes. So now the computer is predicting the next world in the sequence that you're in.
Yeah.
Right. What is most likely to
what
be?
What is the most likely next state of the world that you're in, effectively?
Yeah. Like for example, in our case, we know there's an Alpha Centauri, but we haven't really imaged the planets. And we know there's planets there, but we haven't really imaged them, right?
Right.
So we haven't, just like No Man's Sky.
Now it's a fuzzy pixel, literally.
So basically, there's nothing there until we actually
until we actually go in there. But it fills in the history. Yes. Now, this is where things get really strange. Because not only are you filling in virtual space, but you're also filling in the past.
Yeah.
And so in Minecraft, for example, if you go and you log in, or if we're all old enough to remember Farmville, where you go in and your crops have grown from yesterday.
Yes.
But it's not like the server was sitting there running all the time,
right?
Running your specific crops. What it's doing is it's looking at a database of probabilities and saying, okay, there's a 10% chance that there was
locusts,
locusts,
5% and a delta from the last time you logged into now, which means it's
basically filling in the past for you.
Yeah.
And so in a sense, you're seeing it. You could see NPCs and also the history. And there's a very strange quantum mechanical experiment called the delayed choice.
Oh, yeah.
A double.
It's like the lensing where
quantum, you can. It's like the lensing, but it's where the decision isn't made until after the whether
it's observed, right?
Or not. And so which lens it went through isn't determined until here. But if there's sufficient space between the two lenses and the measurement, then that could have happened in the past.
Yeah.
Yes.
Especially if you use the cosmic version. So my favorite physicist of the 20th century was John Wheeler. Just because he experimented with all these crazy ideas in his mind. In fact, he was the thesis supervisor not only for Feynman, but also for Hugh Everett, who came up with the many worlds theory. But he proposed this experiment, and a cosmic version of it would be if you had a quasar that's 1 billion light years away, and there was a black hole in the middle, and the light had to go to the left or to the right around it, and it was, let's say halfway. So that would literally be 500 million years ago. The light would have had to make the decision which way it's going. But because we can measure the polarization of the light here, say with 2 telescopes, that decision is not actually made until
we actually measure it. So then that back propagates.
Yes. And so, we're talking about the dinosaur era, right?
Yes.
So the decision about the dinosaur era is made now. So that's just
which is
weird.
Wild. Yeah, it's wild. It's brain breaking. I
had a random exchange on Twitter. I think when the first, back when it was called Twitter, when the first edition of the book came out with, I think this comedian Sarah Silverman.
Yeah.
And somehow I don't remember. She said something about simulation theory, or somehow we were interacting, and she said she believes in last Thursdayism. I was like, what is that? Right. So I looked it up, and it's.
But actually, you're now getting into territory where the simulation theory actually sounds pretty mundane compared to everything else that might actually be happening.
Right. There's so many strange things that could actually be happening. Is that we are maybe filling in the past on demand. But then, in computer science, what we do, again, getting back to games often driving technology, but one of the techniques that's used is caching. C-A-C-H-E.
Yes.
Where you're basically trying to say, okay, someone has looked at this recently. Therefore, we're going to have that available. And so as long as people are still looking at it, it sits in the cache.
Right.
Which gets back to this idea that, because people would say, well, then why is the world consistent? Well, you could argue maybe it's not. Maybe we're not seeing the same world, but let's suppose we are.
Yes.
And
it's because it's being cached.
It's because it's being cached.
Right.
Potentially, it's
when you say, look, I saw this thing, and you come over, you're like, yep, there it is.
There it is.
I can see it.
Still there.
Which is where, if we don't have you on the show for another sort of year or so, sort of you'll cease to exist, you realize.
Yes, that's right.
Or you'll have to be reinvented by the system.
That's right.
Or you have to invent this episode.
We're going to download you again. You're no longer in the cache. Now we got to hit the disc.
It's what we in the computer science world we call lazy evaluation.
There we are. Yes.
Where you only evaluate the expression when it's needed. Otherwise, you don't bother
lazy
with
loading of guests.
Lazy loading.
Oh my gosh, I love it. Oh, Riz, this is the problem, man. You come on and I'm like, we blew past an hour a while ago.
Yes.
So we should probably wrap up. But this is, I would ask you 100 questions too, because it just keeps going. That's what's so fun about this. If you would allow me, I will ask you one question, because I thought of this again. I had one of these weird brain firings where I was like, what if this? And so there was a great kids podcast called Greeking Out by National Geographic. Greeking Out, all about Greek mythology and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Which is always a fun time to go back through Greek mythology. It had been years. So, listening to it with my kids, we go through this. And, often the question naturally comes up is, were these people real? Right. And I'm like, well, these are myths, these are stories, and they embody all the lessons we learn and stuff. And then I had a moment where I'm like, if this were a video game, would these heroes, like, would Heracles not be the player? Like, who comes in and has all these abilities, and we're all just these plebs, we're all the NPCs, and these heroes amongst history and religious icons and mythical, Thor and are these not the players?
The gods are the players, and we're
the NPCs.
Yes. We're the NPCs.
Right?
Yes. And very much could be. Right?
And then my son, he goes, well, but why are they not here anymore? I'm like, well, the game's over and they forgot to turn it off. We're just still running. And then I had this existential, kind of fever dream moment where I'm like, wait, does that mean we're just a Xbox in someone's forgotten closet? And when someone eventually
come along with a
when someone eventually goes, they forgot to turn that off. Yeah. Click, boom, lights out.
Well, so people often ask a bunch of questions, and one of the things I do in this version of the book is I have about 20, 30 pages of FAQs, which are questions that people ask me. And one of the most common ones is, why would somebody be running the simulation?
Right.
And I say, well, I'll ask you two questions in return. One, why do we play video games? And then two, why do we run simulations? And the answer to the first is perhaps there are experiences we can have in the video game that we can't have outside of the game, such as, say Grand Theft Auto or flying on a dragon. Now, I don't think the nature of our world is Grand Theft Auto, but that's a whole nother moral, ethical,
also perspective, perhaps
which ties to the spiritual side, which I explore in the book a lot. But that's to have fun, right? And one way to have fun is to have these abilities as players and to level up. The other question of why do we run simulations? It's we want to see what will happen over time.
Yes.
We want to see what is the most likely outcome. But then we might also want to change the parameters and rerun the simulation to figure out what is the most favorable outcome or the least favorable outcome.
Yeah.
So it's possible the game is still running because they're trying to see where we end up.
There we are. Yes.
In this
What's
particular
the endpoint?
timeline,
Yes.
will we destroy ourselves? Will we leave the planet? Etc.
Yeah.
So there's a whole discussion around timelines we can get into.
I like the first theory better. Gods just want to have fun.
That's right. That's right. That's just the main character.
The Cyndi Lauper remake. Yes.
That's right.
Oh my gosh. Well, I can think of no better way to just turn our game off than that, because I don't know how we come back from that. I mean, honestly. Riz, again, this has been an absolute treat. So thank you very much for coming. I mean, Riz Virk, author of The Simulation Hypothesis, the second edition.
Yes.
I'll put a link in all the show notes and the stuff too, where people can buy it. But again, just anywhere books are sold, basically.
Yeah, you can get it online. You can get it in your local bookshops.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. And also, I did want to just do a quick plug also. That's not the only book you've written. You also have The Simulated Multiverse, Wisdom of a Yogi, and Startup Myths and Models as well. So, and is there any more, or is that it?
There's two others.
One
is called Zen Entrepreneurship, which was my very first book that I wrote.
Oh, very good.
About being in a startup world and exploring different aspects of consciousness and mysticism. And another one called Treasure Hunt, which is about looking for glitches in the Matrix and synchronicity.
Oh, very cool. Oh, fantastic. Well, I think, again, looking at the delta between episode 6 and episode 62, let's not make it be that many episodes next time for you to come back, because we'd love to continue this conversation, because I think, again, this is such a fun space to just continue to plumb for just, how does this fit in? And could it be that? Because, I think, a lot of times we'll kind of, this always kind of sneaks its way back into many conversations of, well, it's just a simulation anyway. But I think, it's just a tremendous opportunity to explore these ideas and many others, because I love that you're willing to play with us and go all the weird places that we want to go. It's absolutely fantastic. Much appreciated. So, anything else you want to share with our audience, or do you have any speaking gigs or anything coming up that you want to plug, or?
I do. If they can go to my website, zenentrepreneur.com, or follow me on X at Riz Stanford, or on Instagram as at Riz Cambridge, and I usually post on social media. those. But yeah, so I do have various conferences. I was on a book tour.
Yep.
And I was in Europe recently as well. But that's formally over, although I'm still speaking at conferences.
Very cool. Yeah. Awesome. Well, awesome. Well, Andrew, thank you. This is, again, this
has been fantastic.
Absolute treat. So, so everyone, and again, for all of our listeners, again, I'll put all of Riz's info about the book, but also your website so that people can find you when you're listening, go, I got to get a hold of that guy. If you haven't already looked him up, you can use our show notes to take a shortcut there. But yeah, and again, just a reminder to all of our loyal and new fans out there to help us spread the word. If you enjoy conversations like we're having, please, rate and review the podcast show. That does a tremendous amount of value to getting us out into the simulation, into other Roy's lives, so they can enjoy our podcast while they go along whatever path they choose. So from myself and Andrew, and from our special guest Riz, thank you for joining us on this episode, and we'll see everyone on the next show of Modem Futura.
We will see you there.
End transmission.